Chapter 5. Outside the dining room, I found a decanter of claret and tucked it under my arm, along with a glass, having abandoned my father to nurse his shame alone. I needed air in order to quiet my hectic thoughts. Climbing up to the roof, I found an old moon waning into its last quarter. From below came the clinking of silverware in the dining room. Then, after a while, the lilt of voices spreading out to the bedrooms. It was cold at night in November, and I regretted only wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. My view spanned the formal gardens, the lake on one side, then on the other, the city. The summer flowers had long since faded, and now the frost had killed all but the hardiest of the bright pinks and greens and oranges of the autumn blooming dahlias. Soon snow would swallow the last of the leaves that painted Blumwald in gold and red, and my home would become a charcoal sketch of white and grey. I wouldn't see it happen. This was the last night wrapped in its protective walls, its mosaic of roofs and streets and squares all in brown and yellow. My mother's city, the home of her bones. Cupped around us, the mountains towered silent and black in outline against the starred sky. Somewhere in the dark was the witch's castle. I wondered if it was how she saw us, a boil of stone and thatch and tile rapturing the ever-spreading green of her forest. I downed my glass and poured the next. Would there be anything familiar in the witch's world? Would the same flowers bloom there, the same birds call? I had thrown everything I had away in a moment of despair and spite. I had thrown away my life. Somehow, that was the thought that brought just what I had done into focus. My stomach heaved. I made it to the gutter in time to bring the wine back up, acrid and dark. Shaking, I sunk back on my heels. I would live the rest of my life with a monster. Or perhaps I wouldn't live to see the moon wax full. The sour smell of vomit filled my nostrils, and my teeth felt tacky and coarse. I thought I might be sick again. I was terrified, but I wouldn't back down. I was going somewhere no one in Blumwald dared go. I alone would know what it was to be the witch's companion. My family might think little of me, but none of them would ever do what I was about to. Unsteady with drink, I went back to my room to pack. I wouldn't sleep that night. A team of maids were already at work, folding away my clothes and stowing my dressing table contents into boxes. In a nest of tissue paper, my geological samples were buried like bulbs in winter. Was I this easy to evict? With help, I stripped off the heather evening gown while directing the final stages. My winter clothes, layers of warm underthings, thick woolen socks, flannel petticoats, tweed skirts, and a large, coarse Marinere's jumper from my father had brought back for me from a trip to Denmark, all stuffed together in a trunk. I left behind all the pretty dresses and flimsy evening things. I needed sturdy, hard-wearing clothes. I had to be prepared. In a carpet bag, I packed a change of clothes for the journey, my notebook and roll of pencils. I wanted something of my mother's, but I was at a loss for what to bring. The night was creeping on. I had little time to linger. I took a fragile book from the shelf, a slim volume of stories for children that had been hers as a girl. She had never read to me from it. That had been beyond the amount of mother rings she'd been willing to give. But I had liked to turn the pages and imagine myself as her, making the shape of the words with my lips as she had done, conjuring the same images in both our minds. I folded it up in silk, secured it with a length of twine, and stowed it with my books. Then, in a moment of impulse, I added her drop spindle and the ragged length of fleece I had yet to spin into yarn. My father came to my door an hour before dawn, holding a cup of coffee. Here, he placed it beside me, where I sat in my travelling clothes. Do you have everything you need? I looked at the trunk, the carpet bag by my feet. I didn't know how to answer. Did you ever love me? The question surprised me as much as it did him. Confusion, fear, the faintest glimmer of embarrassment. He closed his eyes. Of course, you are my daughter. Even now he couldn't say the words. That was all the answer I needed. What will you tell them? I hadn't seen my stepmother or my stepsisters since the witch. I can raise them, and you can tell them yourself. I shook my head. Explain it however you want. I didn't owe them anything anymore. You said I was waiting for my life to begin. Well, it's begun now, don't you think?
Mina.
He stopped me as I stood to leave. After a moment of struggle, all he could offer was,
It had to be done.
the 20 years of life together, and he ended them like that. I said nothing, but drained my coffee cup and left my father to carry my bag downstairs. As we passed the bedrooms, I caught a silver of each blow through the half-open doors. My stepmother wrapping her dressing gown over her nightdress. Clara knelt at the foot of her bed in morning prayers. Joanna, with her eyes shut and her hand clasped around her stomach. It was over. It was all over. Only the witch was waiting for me at the palace doors. She wore the same outfit as the night before. Black dress, veil, and gloves. So still and unnatural, she seemed to radiate the chill of stone. I wondered if she slept. I couldn't imagine her doing anything so human. My trunks were lashed to the roof of the carriage as I waited in the blustery wind. Dawn was feeble, thick cloud cover keeping us half night. I felt strangely clarified, like a shard of crystal through which sunlight poured and split into the colors of the spectrum. Whatever tension had been boiling inside me had dissipated. I had done something drastic and snapped it like a piano string turned too tight. The pain had lifted, for now. The snow held off as we travelled, a lowering black blanket of cloud that stalked us up the valley. The witch's carriage was large, a glossy black plush interior that smelled like damp and mould, and upholstered in black velvet, so cold it felt wet. It put me in mind of a coffin. My experience of long carriage journeys was to be wedged in against Clara, bustles and skirts taking up too much room. In contrast, the witch's carriage was impossibly large, space between us almost for another person. The 2 horses I had seen hitched at the front could never pull something like this, and yet we seemed to move at the speed of a locomotive. I didn't understand how that was possible, but I decided not to think about it. For a while I looked out of the window, watching the horses swallow up the earth beneath their hooves, but I began to feel sick and confused, so I closed the blind and confined myself to the musty interior. The storm that threatened never quite came, only speckling handfuls of rain against the windows. Through it all, the witch sat silent, still. Close up with her, I felt more frighteningly aware of her than before. I was entirely at her mercy. My death could come at any moment. Perhaps she would wait until I turned away, strike like a viper, and I would never know it. Or perhaps she would toy with me, cultivate my fear, like fattening a pig. I had thought I could welcome death, but now it faced me. I found myself a liar. I thought perhaps she slept, but when my skirts brushed against hers, she twitched them away in distaste. When a rut in the road jolted me towards her, she leaned away at once. At all times she sat perfectly upright, gloved hands folded in her lap and heavy veil hanging over her face. Was it stuffy under the veil? Did she find it hard to breathe? Did she feel trapped? Or was it armor making her feel safe? Mercifully, her feet were hidden under the hem of her dress. I don't think I could have stood it, being trapped for hours only centimeters away from these hideous, filthy feet. I shuddered, and turning back to the window, I began thinking again about that pale, porcelain face beneath the veil. Why did she hide it? The townspeople thought her a monster, a beast of a woman, as outwardly ugly as she was inside. Was she happy to let them think it? And the question I dared not to ask, what did she want with me? I realized I knew nothing true about her at all. I had a set of assumptions, the scraps of scattered legends passed down by my mother, and the deep sense of unease that roiled in my gut. I felt like a rabbit in the woods, knowing that it would never understand the mind of a fox. Somewhere along the way, I had lost track of our progress. I knew we could only be further up the valley, or into the next river-lined furrow in the mountains, but I couldn't quite place myself from the shape of the peaks. It was the single most disconcerting feeling, like missing a step going downstairs, expecting solid ground and encountering only a lurching void. Following the river, it would eventually take you north to Nuremberg or south to Munich. All travelers took that road, the post riders and the farmers bringing food into market, and the merchants shipping huge bales of wool on barges along the water, and the railway would follow it too, eventually. But we didn't. At some point when the blind had been down, we must have taken a fork, though I had not noticed the carriage shifting direction. We still moved impossibly fast, but now the road was narrow and rocky, the tree line creeping closer on either side. And slowly, steadily, we climbed. Dusk swept in between one bend in the road and the next. Trees came an impenetrable thatch of black and grey. No lanterns hung from the posts of the coach. How could we manage such incredibly speed without seeing clearly? Just as I worried that the witch intended to carry on through the night, we came to an inn nestled at the side of the road, half-timbered with a sharply gabled thatched roof that overhung the ground floor, ready to stand the weight of snowfall. It was a modest place with only 2 stories and no sign outside, but lights were blazing in all the windows, and I was relieved at the thought of one more night between myself and my fate. The witch barely waited for the carriage to stop before letting herself out. Could she really so little stand to be around me? No innkeeper was waiting for us, but the witch went inside, so I followed. An empty room with tables and a broad fireplace, stairs up. The witch began to climb, and again I followed. She snapped round, and I felt the intensity of her glare through the veil. It was the first time she had acknowledged me in hours. If I'd required a dog to cling to my heels, I would have bought one. I trust you can look after yourself for one night. Not waiting for an answer, she stalked upstairs, long skirts trailing behind her. I stood at the bottom, dazed. Outside, the carriage had disappeared, and there was no sign of our driver. The inn seemed to be empty, but on further investigation I found a table laid for one by the fireplace, a plate of boiled potato dumplings, and thick slices of pork in a watery sauce, waiting alongside a stein of beer. I thought at first it must have been meant for the witch, but when she made no further appearance, I sat down and began to eat. I was tired, and in the space of a day I had torn my life into little pieces. Suddenly I didn't care about how the witch might react, or what I was expected to do. There was food, and I was hungry. Upstairs was a series of doors that were all locked save one, which opened onto a room freshly made up for a guest. Behind one of the other doors must be the witch, but I didn't know which one, and I doubted she would respond to me if I went looking. My trunks waited for me at the front of the bed, so I went in. I locked the door behind me, ill at ease. Perhaps it wasn't so strange that there were no other travellers staying in such a remote inn at this time of the year, but surely strange to hear no servants moving in the corridors, tending fires or delivering foods and bags. That night I lay like a still column under the bedding, one tallow candle burning, as I couldn't bear the total dark. I listened to the familiar noises of the forest outside, but I heard nothing. Only a heavy, dull silence, as though I had been plucked out of time and lay in status, while, somewhere beyond, the world continued without me. I must have slept because I woke with the shutters open and the cold autumn sunlight filtering in. Fresh water was on the washstand, and a set of simple travelling clothes had been taken from my trunks and laid out ready for me. A cold prickling sensation. Someone had been in my room while I slept. In the corridor, I thought I saw the edge of skirts disappearing around a corner, the whisper of hushed voices. Perhaps the servant here were just as afraid of the witch as they were in Blumwald. Downstairs, breakfast was waiting, and so was she, sprawled on a chair by the stove, chin resting on her fist, face hidden behind her veil. A pang of fear hit me. I pinched the inside of my arm until my thoughts quieted. Then I made a bargain with myself. One action at a time. All I had to think about was the present moment. Walk across the room, pull out the chair, sit at the table. Keep myself in the witch's favour, if such a thing existed. I picked up my knife and fork and said, "Good morning. I see the snows have held off another day." She didn't reply, but I hadn't expected her to. I chewed mechanically, barely aware of what I was eating. The fear was worse this morning. The flashes of excitement I'd felt at leaving home, being let into the secret of the witch, had dissipated. Now all I could think was that I had given myself over to the monster that had stalked my home for centuries, and like a fool thought I was doing something brave. Under the table, I pinched my arm again. Logic. That was the only way I could get through this. If she meant to kill me quickly, surely she would have done so already. 50 years, that was how often the witch took people. Perhaps we really were her companions, and when our lives ran out, she was lonely enough to take another. In that light the witch, slumped by the fireplace, seemed quite a different figure. I tried again. Do we have to travel much longer? No, I would have left already, but it seems you sleep in. I considered the veil she still wore, despite the fact I had seen her face when we were bound. She didn't want to be seen, yet she had a whole duchy ensnared in fear of her. If you would rather not wear that any more, we could ride with the carriage blinds drawn, I offered. Perhaps the journey would be more comfortable without it. I saw my mistake as soon as I made it. She stiffened, a wave of anger rolled off her. Do not dare tell me what to do. I do not dress for you, and I owe no one my face, least of all some pampered nobleman's daughter who knows a world so small it could fit on a thumbnail. She left me at the table, and I burned with shame and fear. She was right. I knew nothing of this world. I was out of my depth. She had assessed me and dismissed me, and was completely correct in it. Outside, the air was brittle. I could taste the snow poised to fall. The carriage and horses were drawn up outside, and it seemed so normal in daylight. I walked around it once, trying to make sense of its strange dimensions, the uncanny speed with which it had moved. Nothing but an ordinary coach, only a little old-fashioned and heavy on its vast wheels. The witch mounted the step and disappeared inside. I felt a moment of panic at the threshold waiting before me. The inside of my arm was still sore from where I had pinched it. I focused on the pain and climbed into the carriage. We departed. In daylight I could see now that the building was not quite as swallowed by the forest as I had thought. A slender river ran around the back and on through a village. We mounted the hummock of a bridge and rode through the centre, where I saw faces at windows, a flash of pale skin, and hollow eyes before they vanished. A few scrawny chickens pecked through the dirt, and in one place I saw a bucket freshly abandoned, the ground around it stained a richer black with spilled water, as though someone had heard the approaching carriage and fled. An uneasy knot grew in the pit of my stomach. We turned another bend, climbing sharply upwards through the forest, so that now the hamlet was laid out in full like a map. Beyond, the road switched back up the mountainside, bordered the craggy overhangs of raw rock face, and spindly trees, barren for winter. I could see when we stopped. Traversing this road without daylight to show our path would be far too perilous. And above us all, lowering over the forest, was the witch's schloss. A castle, medieval in foundation, with generations of additions, mounted up into a monstrous, looming thing, perched on a spur of rock that jutted out from the mountainside. On 3 sides a drop, one sheer to the river, winding hundreds of meters below, the other 2 far enough to break your neck. The final side rose up to the peaks above. The road would wound around the base of the spur, almost lost amongst the rambling thicket of black thorn, spikes prickling along its branches like claws. Mist cast the world in an unreal milky pall. I could hear the river thundering below, but it was lost to the vale. Above us, the castle was inhumanly large. Great stone fortifications made up its base, slick with moss and weeds, and above it, jumbled walls rose up to a confusion of angled grooves and spiked turrets. The more I looked at it, the less it made sense. I could see windows, squares that must make up rooms, and rounded places I thought would hold spiraled staircases. Our path made a final curve to a bridge that spanned the chasm between the rest of the mountain and the castle. Lowering my window, I looked out as far as I could. The world was washed out, even the trees had lost their luster, and the sky was a low frost waiting to fall. Ahead, the bridge reached the gatehouse, a blank portal through which I could see no more. I longed for a kite to cry, a fox to bark, something natural to tell me I was still in the world I knew. Instead, silence. The carriage slowed as we crossed the bridge, and the metal shoes of the horses rang loud on the cobbles. The great iron-barred doors creaked open, and we passed through to a courtyard. As at the inn, the witch didn't wait for anyone to help her out. She flung herself out onto the flagstones, and near flew to double doors set into the vast bulk of the castle. They swung open before her like a swarm of fish parting round a shark, and then she was swallowed up by the dark interior. I paused a moment, pulling my cloak more tightly round me to take in my new home. There were weeds growing between the cobbles, and a number of the outbuildings had fallen into disrepair. Our driver led the horses not towards the stables, grand things that had once had space for countless animals, now scuttled like wreckage, but back through the through the gate, the doors clanging shut behind him. I'd wanted to speak to our driver, our strange silent attendant of the journey, but he had hurried away. I had never even seen his face. I couldn't go back, so I had to go forward. I climbed the steps to the great hall, and before I had time to think about what I was doing, stepped inside. A vast vaulted ceiling spanned above us. Beneath my feet, flagstones spread out, chipped and dirty and unloved. Two great fireplaces ruptured the walls at either end, both empty and cold. Wood paneling had once covered the stone of the walls up to shoulder height, but it was half rotted away, planks shearing off like dead skin. A wooden staircase swept up 2 floors above, and reaching to the ceiling was a dense thicket of tapestries, lost to smoke, damage, and gloom. Struck through the middle of it, like a split wound, a gash of limestone mountain, bedrock thrusting up to cleave the hall in half. It was as high as my shoulder and entirely wild. This was not home. The witch was halfway up the hall when she ripped the veil from her face and flung it to the floor. She kept marching onwards, and I hurried to keep up, hesitating a moment at the pooled swathe of lace, debating whether to pick it up. Was that sort of thing part of my duties as companion? I left it, and caught up as she reached the staircase. As before, she stopped, blocking my way. Her face was unreadable. Not blank, it was anything but. That beautiful face, its sharp cheekbones and wide storming eyes, had an expression too complicated for me to understand. The disdain for me, the anger I'd seen before, was there still, but also something of sadness about her eyes, exhaustion, and what was that? Fear? Then the expression closed off in a snap, and there was only a sneer twisting her perfect mouth. Go wherever you want, but stay out of my way. Where should I don't care. The tower's off limits. Before I could say anything else, she stalked up the stairs without looking back. The doors at the top slammed behind her. Alone in the vast hall, I went back to the veil and picked it up for something to do. Then I turned slowly around, taking it all in. The mausoleum, these withered remains of some past, glorious world. This grave that I was to live out my life in. For the first time since offering myself, I let myself stand still and look at the thing I had done. I knew there was no steel in my spine. I was a soft, stupid girl who had sent herself into exile for want of a little attention. Now I was trapped in a prison of my own foolish making.